So my name is Jose Rodriguez, and I'm interviewing.
John Yang.
Yeah. So Mr. John Yang, can you share a little about your racial or ethnic background?
So I'm first generation Hmong American, and my parents are from Laos and Thailand. Hmong people don't really have a country, so that's kind of a fun fact for a lot of people. And yeah, I'm pretty much after my parents, I'm the first generation born here in the States.
Okay. And do you know like what brought your parents here?
Yeah, so it was actually the what's termed the Secret War. So during the Vietnam War, the U.S. was in Vietnam trying to fight the communists, right, that were backed by China and Russia. And so they didn't really have a lot of knowledge about the area, the terrain, the geography. And so they recruited the Hmong people, who were kind of like a minority ethnic group within Laos and Thailand, to sort of like fight on their behalf. So we sort of became like secret soldiers, secret spies. It wasn't at the time, it was secretive, but eventually the opposition side, like, they found out that Hmong people were helping Americans fight this war, right? And so because we were kind of like a neutral party, right? We weren't like communist. They also didn't really know about like democracy or America's democracy, but they were at least, I think, being nicer to us than the communists were. And so that's probably why, my people joined their side. And a big historical figure during this time, his name is General Vang Pao. So he was like the army general that was kind of recruited to work directly with the CIA, and then through him, he sort of had like other generals then train and educate and work with like other Hmong soldiers on what the overall like operation was. And so when the war ended, right, when the U.S. pulled out, because they were just like, they don't know what they were doing, right? It was a lot of casualties, but it seemed like they weren't making a lot of progress. They basically allowed Hmong people to like seek asylum within the United States, because we had helped them during the war. And if they were to leave us, then we would just become forget the word, but we would just become slaughtered, right? Because we had helped the opposition. And if the opposition leaves, then the country or the side that won, which is the communist side, they would have just slaughtered their entire people, because we helped, right? And so essentially my parents were kids. My dad was a little older than my mom was, and Hmong people have very different versions of how their parents or how their grandparents crossed over to like eventually got to the U.S. side. Some Hmong people were a little wealthier than others, mostly because like they had farms. So that was sort of like my mom's side of the family. And so because her parents, my grandparents, had a little more income, they sort of paid their way to cross from like the Laos side, which was kind of where all the war was happening, over to the Thailand side, which is where they had the refugee camps for the escapees of the war, right? And so, but my dad was a little less fortunate or a little less wealthy, and so they had to basically travel by foot and avoid, certain pit stops, and avoid traps, and avoid, the opposing side from just capturing and essentially killing everyone. And so a lot of my people, a lot of, again, like the generation before me, they all have a story of like crossing the infamous Mekong River, because Mekong River was what separated like Laos from Thailand. But it was also this like large, I should know this, but probably at least 25 feet wide, river that ran between essentially danger and safety. And so the story that my dad tells is they had to cross over it in the middle of the night while getting shot at, like with his younger brothers and sisters who couldn't swim, right? So he had to like carry them on his shoulders while swimming across. And so eventually they get across. They are entered into the refugee camps, and then from the refugee camps, that's where like aid agencies would come in and help to like sort out the different families and the different people that were in the refugee camps, and to help determine where they would end up across the world, right? Where would they go and basically start a new life? And
so they didn't just send them to the U.S. They also sent them.
They sent them out. Yeah, they sent them to a lot of places, right? So I would say like 90% or maybe 80% were sent to the U.S. in different parts of the U.S., right? So a lot of people to the Midwest, a lot of people to California, a few to the East Coast. Other countries include Australia, France as well, and those are kind of like the two bigger ones outside of the U.S. that more people were sent to. And so that's essentially how like Hmong people came to the U.S. was having escaped the war, making it to the refugee camps, and then through those aid agencies, they were then placed in a home. And so like the way that my mom tells it was they were sponsored because, you know, in the U.S., right, on the U.S. side, they're getting notices about, oh, the war's coming to an end. Oh, there's going to be like all these refugees, and we're going to need families to sponsor refugees, right? And so there was a family in Ohio that they were like, yeah, we'll sponsor a family. But my mom had a big family, so there was like 15 of them. Okay. And so the family, and they were typically like people through the churches, right?
Yeah.
So people through the churches, they're like, yeah, we'll sponsor. And so they sponsored my parents, and essentially my parents were then flown to Ohio, to their neighborhood, to their community. That family, typically a white family, right, would be the ones to like help them find a place to stay, help them find jobs, clothing, food, like all the basic necessities, right, to basically start a life from scratch after just like having escaped a war-torn country. So a lot of people had like white and mostly Christian Catholic sponsors, but a lot of other people already had families who had immigrated to the U.S., and so those families were also able to kind of sponsor their own family members to come, and that's kind of the route that my dad took. So he was sponsored by.
By sponsor, do you mean like fund like their travel, or
more like be willing to host them when they arrive?
Yeah.
Because I think it was like the nonprofits that were paying for the flight too. Yeah. But once the families got to that town or city, then the families that signed up to be sponsors, they would be in charge of like, again, finding room and board and food and clothing, and then if there's young kids, like which schools should they go to, how to get the parents into jobs, or how to get them to fill out the paperwork, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's when I say sponsor, that's kind of what that is.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you imagine that happening to like thousands and thousands of Hmong people, and this is at a time again right when the Vietnam War ended, and it's happening like in masses, and then eventually Hmong people, like our history in the United States is approaching like the 50th anniversary. So like Hmong as an ethnic race and identity, we've only been in the U.S. about 50 years. So you think about like Native Americans who've been here like thousands of years. And you think about like European settlers, a couple hundreds of years. Think about like the Spanish, a couple hundreds as well. Hmong people, 50 years.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so still very recent in terms of like our history as a people.
Yeah. And
our integration into like U.S. society. But for those of us that were born here, went to school here, educated here, those are the stories that I've heard growing up, from my parents. And then you juggle that with like your own journey being an American, right? Like your parents have this very crazy story about how they got to come here and provide this opportunity for you. And then you're just like, I'm just trying to survive school, I'm just trying to find a job, right? So our struggles are very different from their struggles. But to answer your question, that's kind of in a nutshell how Hmong people came to be here in the United States and also other parts of the world.
It's very interesting. I don't think I had ever heard about that.
I've heard of that, yeah.
So
so it's slowly, like if you Google Secret War Vietnam, there's a couple of documentaries that have come out on it now that go into like way more details about like the timeline of everything, and so if you got time, I encourage you to YouTube it, because we know about, like, as as students of like the U.S. history system, right? Like we hear about the Vietnam War, but within the Vietnam War was the secret war, and the secret war was, that was it was Hmong people that were kind of involved. And the reason why it was a big deal is because like we were basically like doing the fighting on behalf of Americans because they were so unfamiliar with the terrain, or they needed help, they needed assistance, right? They were just like, imagine you go to a jungle and you're just like, all right, I got to find the enemy, and then you're like, oh wait, but there's a group of people that can help me, or at least I feel like they can help me. So you're more likely to kind of like tap into that resource to help you navigate this jungle that you've never been through. And so ultimately, I think that's also, I mean, there's many other reasons tied to it, but like not understanding the terrain and how far and willing the opposing side was willing to go to win. That's part of a big reason why the U.S. lost the war, and then in turn had to kind of like take us with them. Because again, if they did not take us, then my parents and their parents would have just been slaughtered. So
I don't know. That's more than
crazy, huh?
Crazy. Yeah.
And it's like even with so if you meet like older Hmong people, generally those who are like 50 or older now, they probably each have a story.